Good morning. Welcome back to Photoshop. Today we're covering chapter 12, and that is Photoshop's vector capabilities, which actually sounds like an oxymoron because we know that Photoshop is raster, bitmap, pixels, and vectors are anchor points and lines and curves connecting them. Doesn't seem the same, and it isn't. Illustrator is what we use for vector art, and Photoshop primarily for raster art. However, we do have vector capabilities in Photoshop, and as you've seen a little and will learn, we do have the ability to use actual photos and pixels in Illustrator. So Photoshop's strength is absolutely pixels, but there are times that we do want to use vector artwork for scaling or maybe doing clipping paths, clean lines around something. So there are tools in Photoshop. So let's just start by making a new file, or not open, a new file. I literally meant to say that, and yet I hit the open button. All right, let's do it the right way. Create new. Any size, does not matter. We're just going to be using some of the drawing tools here to get a look at how it works. So Photoshop's vector tools, I'm just going to quick reset this, are right down here in about the bottom third of the toolbar. So we have a pen tool, and we have nested within that all of the pen tools that we would expect: freeform, curvature, add an anchor point, delete, and convert. We know those from Illustrator. We have a type tool, which you guys have been using quite a bit, and type, when we first use it, is vector. It can be resized to any dimension that we choose our type to be, and then ultimately it's rasterized. So it is just pixels when we're done. Then we have our selection tools, just like in Illustrator. The path selection, which is the main one, and then the direct selection tool, which allows us to choose anchor points, just like it does in Illustrator. And then we have the shape tools. We have a rectangle, ellipse, triangle, polygon, line, and custom shape tool. And then we have our hand. And nested in that, very oddly, is the rotate view tool, which we learned about weeks and weeks ago. That just changes your view on screen, not the actual document. So within these tools, we have quite a few options, and we're going to experiment with them. Let's start by choosing the rectangle tool, and let's take a look up at our option bar and work through that. The first area, we have a drop-down box. We have shape by default, path, or pixels. A shape, which is a default, is a vector path. It includes a fill and a stroke, just like in Illustrator. We can vary the stroke width, we can change the fill and stroke at any time, and we do see those right here: fill, stroke, the size, what the stroke actually looks like, how it's aligned, caps, corners, etc. So, whoops, I guess I clicked and made a teeny tiny rectangle up there. There we go. Didn't want to do that. So we have the shape option. Then we have the path. A path has no stroke, no fill, does not print. So what is it? That almost doesn't make sense. It's basically when you're using it as a clipping mask. You just want to create the shape and then define it as a clipping mask. So when you bring this photo into a program like InDesign and you have a circle clipping mask on top of your photo, only the part of the photo inside that circle will appear in InDesign, which is probably the design that you were going for. The final one is pixels. Never used, neither does the book author. This option fills the path you create with color and then deletes the path. So this just leaves you with a group of pixels that you can't edit. So what's the point? So shape and path are the primaries, and let's stick with shape. Let's just take your colors. Boy, this is a weird look. Recently used colors. Evidently I've been in some crazy brown world. Let's go into the RGB, just pick red. Stroke, I'm going to put a black stroke on it, and I'm going to keep it at 1 point for now. So with our rectangle tool, we're just going to click and drag out a rectangle and it will be assigned a red fill with a black 1-point stroke. We can come over to our appearance panel and see where we can tweak this. So if we wanted a larger stroke, and if we maybe wanted it to be dotted, we could do that, or dashed. This works just like it does in Illustrator. So right now it's a 4-point dash with a 2-point gap. And if you wanted to repeat something different, so I did 4 gap 2, 3 gap 1, and repeat that, you can see how it looks different. Some other things in the appearance panel, we have the alignment. So by default, it's centered half in and half outside of your shape, but we could put it all on the inside or all on the outside of the shape. If we had just a straight line, we could determine how our end caps look. Does it end exactly where the line starts, the path? Is it rounded, or is it squared off outside of it? And we have the way our corners are handled as well. Something new to Photoshop is that these are live shapes, and the option to curve them or give it a rounded radius on the rectangle is a live thing right here with our corners. So you can see that when I'm hovering, it allows me to round it in a variety of ways. And right now, because all 4 are locked, I'm getting all 4 of them behaving differently. So I could change all of these but 1 to be 0, and just that lower right corner stays rounded, and I could even round it more. So very much like Illustrator, very helpful. All right, changing the object's dimensions we can do up here in the transform area, the width by height, the rotation of it, flipping it horizontally or vertically. And then we also have the option to work with multiple paths. So if we go back up to our option bar, a lot of these same options are here that are over here in the properties panel. We have the options of our width and height. Our next option is how this tool behaves. So if we draw out another shape, do we want it to be on a new layer? If we look over at our layers panel, that rectangle we made is on its own layer, and this little icon in the lower right corner indicates that it's a shape. So clicking, drawing another one would add it to a new layer, or do we want to combine shapes? So with that selected, if we attempt to combine shapes, we get something like this, just like we would in Illustrator. If we choose to subtract the front shape, that takes away from the front shape. Intersect, and exclude the overlapping areas. So very much like Illustrator, and the default behavior here is that a new layer is created. We also have stacking right here. We can send shapes frontward or backward. We have alignment tools, just like we do in Illustrator, as far as vertical, horizontal, and distribute options. I'm just going to delete that. By default, we have align edges checked here. And what that does is, let's see, I'm going to take this stroke off real quickly, and then I'm going to zoom in. So you can see that this still does know that there's pixels involved because it's Photoshop, and because of that check mark for align edges, when we draw our shapes, they're automatically going to snap to the pixel grid, even though at this point they're still vectors. So that option is on by default. If we were to turn it off, so I'm just going to go to a different tool, come back here to the rectangle tool, make sure it's a new layer and not align the edges, and just randomly draw something down here. If I zoom in, I may have gotten lucky and had it snap, or very likely, whoops, slow down, I was not super lucky. Well, I got reasonably lucky. Sorry, I'm just trying to zoom in enough. Can you see that there is a little bit of a gap there? It's not entirely perfect, but I did get pretty lucky when I drew that. So leave this on. You're going to want it to snap to the grid so that when you do rasterize it at the end, it's going to work out. Some other options that we need to look at here. Over in our tool panel are the rounded rectangle tool. We can use that, but we already have this awesome built-in option right here where we can just pull on these. So the rounded rectangle is kind of a legacy tool from when that didn't exist. Ellipse will make ovals or circles. We have a triangle, a polygon tool. Instead of hitting up and down arrows like we do in Illustrator, we actually define it up here in our option bar before we draw. So here are how many sides on our polygon. 5, and is it going to be rounded or not? And then when we draw it out, if you hold shift, of course, you're going to get perfect dimensions. If you don't hold shift, you can stretch it in any which way. And then finally, well, not finally, we have a line tool. So I can make a line that is 10 pixels wide is what I have it set up with right now. And finally, we have the custom shapes. Now this one I really enjoy. In your custom shapes, I'm going to twirl shut this. You have, and these are some new ones, leaf trees. Here's all the custom shapes, wild animals, boats, and flowers. And for the longest time, I've actually added some to this, and it just added these defaults again. So leaf through flowers is the new default, and I added it 2 or 3 times before I realized what I really wanted was the legacy shapes. And in here we have the 2019 legacy shapes. They have some forests and mountains and cactus and whatever. But better yet in my world are the all legacy default shapes, because there's really useful things in here like arrows, which I used all the time. I want that arrow. I'm going to drag it out. That's exactly what I wanted. So to get to those legacy shapes, you might have to click up here and do an import if you don't see those. Append the default shapes. Like I said, the defaults right now are those top 4, and I've appended them way too many times, so I have way too many duplicates. Import shapes should get you to the legacies. And why those aren't just part of it anymore, I don't know. So let's move on and look at the pen tool in Photoshop. We can close this file also. We're done using it.